Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are tackling something that I think it's fair to say is, well, it's monumental.
That is definitely the right word for it.
And I don't mean monumental just in page count. In fact, the actual book we're covering is surprisingly thin. It's the scope that's just massive.
It is indeed. We are looking at The Lessons of History, which was published back in 1968 by Will and Ariel Durant.
And for anyone who knows the Durants, that name is synonymous with their life's work, The Story of Civilization.
Which is this massive, shelf-breaking 10-volume series covering, well, basically all of recorded history.
Everything. They spent 4 decades writing it. I mean, can you imagine? 4 decades on a single project.
It's almost unthinkable today. They covered about 100 centuries of human history. They looked at the rise of Egypt, the glory of Greece, the fall of Rome, the Renaissance, the Reformation.
The whole sweep.
The whole sweep. And when they were finally done, or at least when they reached the year 1789 and the French Revolution, they decided to do something pretty fascinating.
They went back and reread their own work.
All 10 volumes.
Which sounds absolutely exhausting just thinking about it. Imagine finishing a 10,000-page project and then just saying, okay, let's start over from the top.
I think it was a real labor of love.
Yeah.
You know? But it was also a search for meaning. They wanted to see if, by looking at this massive sweep of human experience, they could actually spot the patterns.
Right. To see if it all adds up to something.
Exactly. They wanted to know if history actually makes sense. Is there a logic to it? Or, and this is their phrase, is history just a weary rehearsal of mistakes that we are destined to make over and over again?
That is the big question, isn't it? Do we actually learn from history, or are we just doomed to repeat the same cycles with different technology?
That's the core of it.
So the mission for this deep dive is to try and answer those big questions. We're going to look at biology, race, economics, socialism, war, all through the lens of these 2 historians who tried to compress 100 centuries into about 100 pages.
And I think it's important to set the tone right from the start, just as the Durants did themselves. They approach this with a profound sense of humility.
Yeah, I loved that part of the introduction. They don't claim to have a scientific formula for the future. They aren't selling you a crystal ball here.
No, absolutely not. In fact, they quote a very famous line, "History is a fable not quite agreed upon."
I love that.
It's a great way to frame it. They acknowledge right away that our knowledge of the past is always incomplete. It's beclouded by, ambivalent evidence. And let's be honest, historians themselves are biased.
Of course. They have to be.
They select the facts that fit their own predilections. They can't help it.
They had a great line about that, something about how a historian simplifies the chaos of reality just to make it readable.
That's it.
Like, if you tried to write down everything that happened in the world just yesterday,
Right.
The book would be 1,000,000 pages long and completely unreadable. You have to edit. You have to choose what matters.
Exactly. The Durants call historiography an art and a philosophy, not a science. And they admit that the world changes so fast now that past patterns might not even hold.
That's a key point.
They reference a French writer, Charles Péguy, who said the world changed less from the time of Jesus Christ up to 1900 than it did in the 30 years after 1900.
And that was written in 1968. I mean, imagine what they'd say about the last 30 years, the internet, AI, everything.
It's exponential. And this connects to their analogy of the unpredictable electron. In physics, you can know a particle's position or its momentum, but not both at once. There's an uncertainty.
And history has that too.
It does. You can map out the past, you can see the big trends, but there is always a quirk of character or a freak accident that completely shifts the timeline.
Like their example of Alexander the Great.
Perfect example. He conquers half the known world, and then at the absolute height of his power, he drinks himself to death at age 32.
And if he hadn't, the entire map of the world might look different today. The language we speak could be different.
Precisely. That one event changed everything. So if we can't predict the future, what's the point of studying history?
That's what they ask.
And the answer is perspective. The point is to see our present moment in the light of the long past. As they say, it helps us bear reality patiently.
I like that. Bear reality patiently. It's not about knowing what's next. It's about understanding where we are now.
It's about seeing the bigger picture.
Okay, so let's unpack this reality. They start with the most fundamental things. The physical foundations, the Earth itself. And this is where that humility really kicks in. They basically say history is just a brief spot in space.
It's such a humbling check on our collective ego, isn't it? We often think of history as this grand narrative of human will, of great men and women shaping the world.
Right. The story of us.
But the Durants remind us that we exist entirely by geological consent. And that consent can be withdrawn at any moment without any notice.
Right. A supervolcano or an asteroid doesn't care about your civilization or your stock market or your political ideals.
Not in the slightest. Geology is the master. Cities disappear under lava or get swallowed by the sea. Whole civilizations can be wiped out by a change in the climate.
And then there's geography, which they call the matrix of history. It's the stage on which the drama plays out.
And this was a fascinating idea to me, the concept of stimulating habitats. It's not just about having good soil or a lot of resources.
No, it's more subtle than that.
It's about the level of challenge. They argue that climate puts very real limits on us. If it's too cold, all your energy is just spent trying to survive. You don't have time to invent philosophy or create art.
You're too busy not freezing to death.
Right. But if it's too hot, they use the term semi-tropical heat, it can be enervating. It saps your energy. It slows you down.
So you need that Goldilocks zone. Not too hard, not too easy.
Exactly. You need a climate that challenges you enough to become ingenious and tough, but doesn't kill you outright. They suggest that while warm climates might support huge populations, those populations are often subject to conquest by warriors coming from these more stimulating northern zones.
But technology can change that map, right? I mean, that's a huge theme. We have air conditioning now. We can build cities in the desert. We have airplanes.
And that is a crucial point that Durants make. And it shows how forward-thinking they were. Technology constantly redraws the geographic advantage.
The airplane is the big one.
It's the perfect example. For centuries, for millennia, sea power was everything. If you had a jagged coastline with lots of natural harbors, like Greece or Italy or England, you could rule the world because you controlled maritime trade.
Right. It was just vastly cheaper and faster to float goods on water than to drag them over land.
But the airplane just ignores the coastline. It flies right over it, doesn't care about mountains or harbors. And the Durants point out that this shifts the advantage to what they call landmass countries.
Countries like Russia, China, Brazil,
Yeah.
the big continental powers.
Exactly. Suddenly, their vast interiors are no longer a disadvantage. They don't need the coastline as much if trade and transport and even military power go aerial.
That is a huge strategic shift. So England loses its natural monopoly, and these giant land empires rise. It's almost like the rules of the board game changed halfway through.
And they're always changing. That's the point. We are, in their words, transient guests on this planet. We can overcome some handicaps. We can build irrigation in the desert. We can cool a factory in the heat. But the Earth still dictates the fundamental rules of the game.
Okay, so that's the stage. The Earth sets the scene. Now let's talk about the actors in the play, the biological lessons.
Yep.
This was probably the most bracing part of the book for me. They really do not pull any punches here.
They certainly do not. They distill biology down to 3 very hard, very unsentimental lessons, and they apply these biological laws directly to human societies and to nations.
All right, let's start with lesson 1. Life is competition.
This one really breaks down the illusion of the peaceful state of nature. The Durants argue that while cooperation absolutely exists in nature and in human society, it's usually just a tool.
A tool for what?
A tool to strengthen a group, so we can compete more effectively against other groups. We cooperate within our family to survive in the village. We cooperate in the village to survive against the neighboring village. We cooperate as a nation to compete against other nations.
They had that one line that it stopped me in my tracks. War is a nation's way of eating.
It is a visceral image, isn't it?
Yeah.
But if you think about it biologically, it makes a kind of cold sense. An animal eats to survive. It doesn't have moral qualms about eating a plant or another animal. It needs resources to live.
And the state is the same way.
The state, the Durants argue, has all the instincts of an individual: acquisitiveness, pugnacity, pride, but without the moral restraints that society puts on an individual.
Because there's no super government to throw the state in jail if it misbehaves.
Exactly. International law is, historically, very weak. There are laws to protect you and me from killing each other, but there's effectively nothing that protects the state. It is an outlaw entity in a largely lawless world, so it takes what it needs to survive and grow.
So all this talk about peace, it's just a temporary state of affairs, an unstable equilibrium.
That's their term for it. Peace is an unstable equilibrium. It lasts only as long as the power balance dictates. The moment one side gets weak or another side gets hungry and strong, the eating begins again.
Wow. Okay, that's a sobering start. Let's move to lesson 2. And this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little controversial for modern ears. Lesson 2 is life is selection.
This is the lesson that pushes back hard against a lot of modern political idealism.
Mm-mm.
The Durants state it very plainly.
Yeah.
We are born unfree and unequal.
Unfree and unequal. Can you unpack that?
Well, unfree because we're subject to our physical and psychological heredity and to the customs of our group.
Right.
And unequal because, well, just look around.
They say nature loves difference.
Nature thrives on variation, so it can select the strongest, the most adaptable. No two peas in a pod are exactly alike, and certainly no two humans. And because of this natural, unavoidable inequality, there is an inherent and eternal conflict between freedom and equality. This is a central thesis of the book.
Okay, explain that relationship. Why are freedom and equality sworn enemies, as they put it?
Think about it this way. If you leave men completely free laissez-faire, no government intervention, their natural inequalities of skill, intelligence, strength, and luck will multiply with every generation.
The clever will get richer, the strong will dominate.
The gap between the rich and poor, the powerful and the weak, will widen dramatically. The concentration of wealth we talked about earlier is a natural result of freedom.
So freedom, left unchecked, actually creates inequality.
Exactly. So if you want to maintain a level of equality,
You have to restrict freedom.
you have to step in. You have to tax the rich to help the poor. You have to regulate business to protect the weak. You have to implement social programs. You have to restrain the ambitions of the strong to give the less able a chance.
You can't have both, not in their absolute forms.
Never. It is the fundamental tension of all governance. You are always turning one knob up and the other one down. And this is why, they argue, history is often driven by the exceptional individual. Because inequality is natural, history is made by those few people who can seize the opportunities that their superior abilities present. The geniuses, the inventors, the leaders, the saints.
Which leads us right into lesson 3. Life must breed.
Nature, they say, has a passion for quantity. She seems to think that if there are enough organisms, a few will be brilliant enough or strong enough to survive the struggle for existence. She prefers the large litter.
And this brings up the ghost of Thomas Malthus, the Malthusian trap.
It does. Malthus was the English economist who argued back in the 18th century that population, when unchecked, grows faster than the food supply.
Right, population grows geometrically 2, 4, 8, 16, while food production grows arithmetically 1, 2, 3, 4.
So eventually, inevitably, you run out of food. You outgrow your environment.
And nature's way of balancing the books is pretty brutal.
It is. The positive checks Malthus talked about are famine, pestilence, and war. These are the natural ways population is brought back in line with the food supply.
But hold on, haven't we kind of solved that? We have industrial farming, the Green Revolution, we have birth control. We seem to have outrun Malthus.
The Durants address that directly. They fully admit that technology, especially in the last 2 centuries, has allowed us to outrun Malthus so far. We produce more food than ever before. But they do offer a really interesting and, again, slightly controversial warning about birth control.
They mention it might be dysgenic. Now, we should probably explain what they mean by that, because that's a very loaded term today.
It is, and it's important to state they are reporting on a historical anxiety, not necessarily endorsing it as a biological fact. The fear at the time was that if only the educated and intelligent classes practice family planning because they're planning their careers, they want to invest more in fewer children, while the less educated continue to have large families.
Then the average intelligence level of the society slowly drops over generations.
That's the fear. It sounds a bit like the plot of the movie Idiocracy.
It does, a little.
But the Durants themselves add a crucial nuance here. They admit that intelligence isn't strictly genetic. It's largely a product of opportunity and education. A genius can be born in a slum. But they end the chapter with a stark reminder. Nature ultimately measures success by fertility. Survival of the fittest, in the long run, often just means survival of the most fertile.
It's a numbers game in the end. If a group doesn't reproduce, its ideas and culture die with it.
In the grand scheme of history, yes, that seems to be the lesson.
Okay, so we've got the biological realities on the table. We compete, we are unequal, and we breed. Let's move to section 2, the human element. Specifically, they tackle race and then character.
This section is really a product of its time. It was written in 1968 on the heels of the civil rights movement and looking back at a century of very intense and often horrific racial theories.
Right. They start by talking about the Aryan theory that was so popular in the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Yes, writers like Arthur de Gobineau and Houston Stewart Chamberlain. The central idea was that all of human civilization was the product of one specific Nordic or Aryan stock, that only this one group of people had the innate ability to create culture, art, and science.
And the Durants just completely and methodically dismantle this.
Thoroughly. And they do it with the best tool this historian has: evidence. They don't just make a moral argument that it's wrong, they make a historical argument that it's factually incorrect.
How so? What examples do they use?
They just start listing great civilizations. They point to China, a massive, enduring, highly sophisticated civilization created by a people the Aryan theorists would have dismissed. They point to India and the Dravidians, who built incredible temples and wrote profound philosophy long before the Aryans arrived there.
And what about the Americas?
Exactly. The Mayans with their astronomy, the Aztecs with their architecture, the Incas with their social organization, highly complex societies built with zero influence from Europe.
And the Middle East.
And the Semites, a term they use, from Babylon and Phoenicia to Carthage and the Islamic Golden Age. These peoples gave the world writing, the first legal codes, three major religions: the Bible, Christianity, and the Quran.
So the evidence is just overwhelming.
It's a complete rebuttal. And their verdict is one of the most powerful lines in the book. It is not the race that makes the civilization, it is the civilization that makes the people.
I love that. Can you explain what that means?
It means that the primary factors are geography and economics. Those circumstances create a specific culture, a way of life, a set of challenges and opportunities. And that culture, over centuries, molds the people living within it. It shapes their habits, their appearance, their character.
So what we think of as racial characteristics are often just deep-seated cultural habits.
Precisely. They argue that racial antipathies are almost always cultural in origin, not biological. They are acquired, not innate.
Okay, so if race doesn't explain the course of history, what about character? Human nature, does that change over time?
Here, their answer is a resounding and perhaps depressing no.
So we really are just trousered apes with nuclear weapons.
That's the phrase they use later on, yes.
Yeah.
They argue that the fundamental instincts of humanity fighting, mating, acquiring, competing are constant. They haven't changed in recorded history.
So a citizen in ancient Rome...
A Roman in the Forum behaved just like a man in Times Square. They had the same basic drives for food, sex, and power. They loved their children, they feared death, they got greedy, they were kind. Only the tools and the customs have changed. We kill with missiles instead of spears, but the instinct to kill an enemy is the same.
They have this table of character elements in the book. Action versus sleep, fight versus flight.
Acquisition versus avoidance. It's this constant duality. We all have these instincts pulling at us. And because our biology is so slow to change, we haven't really evolved biologically in thousands of years. Any evolution has to be social.
What do they mean by social evolution?
It's not in our genes. It's transmitted through custom, tradition, and education. We don't evolve to be better citizens. We are taught to be better citizens by our families, our schools, our societies.
And this brings up a fantastic point they make about the conflict between the rebel and the conservative. I love their take on this. Usually you hear people taking one side or the other. We need radical change, or we must protect tradition.
And their Durants say we absolutely need both. They're both essential for a healthy society.
So the great man, the genius, the innovator, they initiate change.
Yes, they're the engine. They're the ones who have the new idea, who see a better way. They are the radicals.
But the conservative...
The conservatives, the flywheel. Or, to use their metaphor, the roots of the tree. They resist the change. And that resistance is not just valuable, it's necessary.
They are the roots resisting the new grafts.
Exactly. Imagine if we accepted every single new idea immediately. Society would be in a state of constant chaotic flux. Nothing would be stable. The conservative resistance forces new ideas to prove their worth.
It's a trial by fire.
It compels them to go through the mill of objection, as they call it. If an idea can survive that intense scrutiny and resistance, it's probably a good idea. It prevents society from chasing every fleeting fad and throwing out the wisdom of the past.
So political gridlock is actually a good thing from a historical perspective.
In a way, yes. It stabilizes the passage of time. It ensures that change is evolutionary, not just a series of violent spasms.
Okay, so let's move on to the structures that try to hold this unstable human nature together. Morals and religion. This is another area where they just strip away the sentimentality.
This is where the historian's long view is so useful. We tend to think of our moral code as absolute. Right is right, wrong is wrong, and that's the end of it.
But the Durants say no. Morals are pragmatic. They are adjustments to economic conditions.
That's the thesis. The moral code of a society is a tool designed to help that society survive in its specific economic reality.
And they break it down into three great economic stages of history: hunting, agriculture, and industry. This framework made so much sense to me.
It's a very clear and pragmatic view. Let's take the hunting stage, which was most of human history. What do you need to survive?
You need to be aggressive. You need to be able to kill.
You need to catch your dinner and fight off predators. So pugnacity, brutality, even greed are actually virtues. They are survival traits. If you're passive and gentle, you and your family starve.
But then we invent farming, and everything changes.
The whole moral code has to be rewritten. In an agricultural society, you don't need bursts of violence. You need steady routine. You need industriousness to plant and harvest. You need thrift to save seeds for next year. And crucially, the family becomes the central unit of production.
Right. Children are an economic asset on a farm.
Exactly. You need more hands to work the fields. A 5-year-old can weed a garden or feed chickens. So large families are a blessing, and birth control becomes immoral.
And chastity becomes a huge deal.
Because property and inheritance are everything. The father needs to know his children are his so he can pass down the farm. So premarital chastity is strictly enforced, and the father is the absolute boss because he owns the land. That agricultural code ruled Europe for more than 1,500 years.
But then along comes the Industrial Revolution.
And it just smashes the agricultural code to pieces. Men leave the family farm for the anonymous factory, women are industrialized and enter the workforce, and children are no longer assets. In the city, they become economic liabilities.
That is a harsh way to put it, but it's true. They cost a lot of money to raise in a city. They don't bring in a harvest.
And the city offers anonymity. On the farm, the whole village watched you. Your reputation was everything. In a crowded city, you can disappear. So the old restraints of community and religion start to crumble. Premarital chastity loses its economic logic.
And this is why they say we are currently living in a state of moral decay. But they don't mean it in a purely negative way. It's a transition.
Yes. They're not being preachy about it. They're being descriptive. The old agricultural code is dying because its economic basis is gone, but we haven't fully figured out what the new industrial moral code is yet. We're in the gap. The interregnum.
They do offer a little bit of historical consolation, though. They say every age has seen itself as uniquely sinful.
Man has never reconciled himself to the 10 Commandments. That's their line. History is full of gambling, corruption, prostitution, and all the rest. We just see it more now because the old covers of religion and community have been blown off.
Which brings us perfectly to religion itself. The Durants seem to think religion is pretty much indispensable to civilization.
They view it functionally, like a sociologist would. They don't spend time asking, is religion true? They ask, what does it do for society?
And what does it do?
History shows that it does a lot. It offers supernatural comfort to the unhappy, the suffering, the bereaved. It gives a sense of cosmic dignity to the lives of the poor. And it provides a powerful support for the moral code.
And for the state. There's that Napoleon quote they use. Religion keeps the poor from murdering the rich.
It sounds cynical, but from a state's perspective, historically, it's been a powerful stabilizer. It creates a moral superstate. Think of the church in the Middle Ages. It was the only authority that could check the power of kings. It established the truce of God to limit warfare.
But religion itself has a life cycle, doesn't it? A rise and fall.
A very clear one. It starts in fear of the unknown. It grows to support morality. It becomes powerful and allied with the state. Then it often becomes corrupt or complacent, and then skepticism rises.
The death of God.
Which they trace back, surprisingly, to Copernicus.
Really? That far back, I would have thought the Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment was a huge part of it, but they argue the seed was planted when we realized we weren't the center of the universe. When the Earth was just a speck revolving around the sun, our role as the protagonists of the great cosmic drama was suddenly in doubt.
And then the Industrial Revolution just accelerated that decline.
Massively. The machine replaced the miracle. We look to science for cures now, not prayer. We look to the state for charity, not the church.
But they warn against counting religion out for good.
Oh, absolutely. Religion has a habit of resurrection. They give examples. Akhenaten tried to destroy the old Egyptian religion, but it came roaring back the moment he died. They look at the French Revolution's attempt to create a secular state and how Napoleon had to bring the church back to restore order.
And they look at the Soviet Union.
Which is fascinating. They say that if the socialist regime in Russia fails to eliminate poverty and war, the new religion of communism will lose its fervor and the old faith of the motherland will come back.
And looking at Russia today, with the resurgence of the Orthodox Church, that was an incredibly prescient observation for 1968.
It really was. And they end with a stark warning. There is no significant example in history of a society successfully maintaining moral life without the aid of religion.
That is a heavy thought. Can we be good without God? History's answer seems to be, we haven't really pulled it off on a mass scale yet.
Not for long, at least. When the central myth that supports the moral code dies, the morals usually wobble.
Okay, let's pivot from the heavens to the earth, to the engine that drives so much of this: economics.
The Durants are very clear here, and they align with many other historians on this point. History is very often economics in action.
It's not just about great heroes and grand speeches. At its root, it's about the competition for resources. Who gets what?
They reinterpret major historical events through this lens. The Crusades weren't just about recovering the Holy Land for faith. They were trade wars, fought by Italian city-states to capture lucrative trade routes to the east.
And the French Revolution wasn't just about liberty, equality, and fraternity.
It was also the financial victory of the rising business class, the bourgeoisie, over the landowning aristocracy and the clergy. It was a transfer of economic power.
But they do note some exceptions. Sometimes raw political or military power can dictate the economic reality, like the Mongol conquests.
Right. The Mongols didn't win because they had a superior economic system. They won because they were incredibly fierce warriors. Then, after they conquered, they got rich. Power came first.
Now, this next part of the economics chapter is something I think everyone listening needs to hear and understand. The concentration of wealth.
This is one of those patterns they found that is as certain as death and taxes. Because men are naturally unequal in ability in a free market, wealth will naturally concentrate in the hands of the most able.
Or the most ruthless, or the luckiest.
Or all of the above. The people who are good at managing money, at organizing businesses, at taking risks, the bankers, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, will always over time end up with a larger share of the pie.
They call this the systole and diastole of history.
Like a heartbeat. Systole is the contraction, when the blood flows to the center. That's wealth concentrating. It concentrates and concentrates and concentrates.
Until it reaches a breaking point, an explosive point,
Yeah.
And that's diastole.
The expansion. The heart relaxes. And in history, that means the wealth gets redistributed.
And how does that happen?
There are only two ways. Either it's redistributed peacefully through legislation, or it's redistributed violently through revolution.
They give two case studies from the ancient world that are just, they're perfect illustrations. Solon of Athens versus the Gracchi brothers in Rome. Let's tell the Solon story first.
Okay, so you have Athens in 594 BC. The wealth disparity is massive. The rich own everything. The poor are so deep in debt that some are even selling themselves and their children into slavery to pay it off. Revolution is in the air.
So the rich are terrified.
They are.
Yeah.
So they bring in Solon, a respected businessman of aristocratic lineage, to mediate. He comes in with a middle path. He devalues the currency, which makes it easier for debtors to pay. He cancels all personal debts. He ends imprisonment for debt. And he creates a progressive income tax on the rich.
And I bet everyone hated it at first.
Oh, they did. The rich screamed confiscation. The radical poor were furious that he didn't just seize all the land and redivide it. But it worked. It relieved the pressure. It saved Athens from a bloody civil war. It was a peaceful redistribution.
Yeah, a masterclass in reform. Now contrast that with the Gracchi in Rome a few centuries later.
A very similar situation. Tiberius Gracchus becomes tribune in 133 BC. He sees the small farmers being squeezed out by giant slave-run estates. He tries to pass a law to redistribute public land back to the poor.
And the Senate, filled with rich landowners, blocks him.
They do, so he appeals directly to the people, violating tradition, things get heated,
The result.
horrific violence. A mob of senators and their clients grab broken benches and clubs from the forum and beat Tiberius and 300 of his followers to death. His brother Caius tries to continue the reforms a decade later. He and thousands of his supporters are hunted down and killed.
And Rome pays the price.
A terrible price. That violence ushered in 100 years of brutal class war and civil war that only ended when a dictator, first Caesar and then Augustus, took absolute power to restore order.
So the lesson is crystal clear. Redistribute peacefully through reform, or history will do it for you violently and it won't be pretty.
That's the lesson.
Speaking of redistribution, let's talk about socialism. The Durants make a point that I think is often forgotten. Socialism isn't some new 20th century invention.
Not at all. It's one of history's oldest ideas. It has appeared dozens of times in different forms.
They list Sumeria, ancient Egypt, Rome. Let's look at the example of the Incas in Peru. They say it was the longest-lasting socialist regime.
It was. The Inca Empire was a completely state-organized economy. The government owned all the landed resources. Everyone was an employee of the state. Your job, your food, your housing, your marriage, it was all determined by the bureaucracy.
So you had total security.
Absolute security from cradle to grave. But you had zero liberty. You did what you were told, you ate what you were given, you lived where they sent you. It lasted for centuries, right up until Pizarro and the Spanish showed up.
And then there's the amazing story of Wang Mang in China. I had never even heard of this guy.
He is a fascinating figure. This was around the time of Christ. He's a Confucius scholar who seizes the throne, becomes emperor. And he tries to implement a massive socialist program.
Right.
He nationalizes all the land. He sets price controls on food. He gives state loans to the poor.
Sounds great on paper. A real reformer.
He was trying to be the Solon of China,
Uh.
but it was a complete disaster.
Why? What went wrong?
A combination of bad luck and human nature. Catastrophic floods and droughts ruined the economy, which people blamed on him. And the merchants and landowners who had lost their profits and property organized resistance against him. He was eventually overthrown and killed in a rebellion. And as the Durants say, everything was as before.
So what's the grand takeaway from all this? The eternal battle between capitalism and socialism.
The Durants conclude that the future is likely a synthesis, a blend of the two. They argue that capitalism is brilliant at production. It unleashes innovation and creates immense wealth, the baking of the cake.
But it's not so great at distribution.
No. Socialism is, in theory, better at distribution, the cutting of the cake. And so they have this wonderful line.
The fear of capitalism compels socialism to widen freedom. The fear of socialism compels capitalism to increase equality.
It's a balancing act. Each system checks the worst excesses of the other. The result is what we've come to call the welfare state.
Okay, moving on to Section 5, power and violence, government and war.
They run through the classic forms of government. Monarchy, they say, is the most natural. It's an extension of the family, with the king as the father. But hereditary succession is a total roll of the dice. You might get a wise ruler like Marcus Aurelius, or you might get a complete fool like Caligula.
What about aristocracy?
Ruled by a select minority. This, they say, is almost inevitable in any society. The majority is simply too disorganized and uninformed to rule effectively. Aristocracies often provide culture and stability, but they almost always become selfish, stagnant, and exclusive over time,
And that leaves democracy.
which they call a recent and very rare phenomenon in history.
They make the point that ancient democracy, like in Athens, wasn't really democracy as we know it because it was built on a foundation of slavery. A huge portion of the population couldn't vote.
Correct. And they bring up Plato's famous critique of democracy, which is frankly chilling. Plato argued that democracy inevitably decays into chaos. The definition of liberty becomes anarchy. The young disrespect the old, students attack their teachers, and everyone demands total freedom without responsibility.
And out of that chaos, a strong man rises. Dictatorship is born from the excesses of democracy.
It's the cycle. The people become so tired of the disorder that they welcome a tyrant who promises to restore order. But the Durants do defend democracy. They say that for all its flaws, it has done less harm than other forms of government. It provides a certain zest and camaraderie.
But it has a fatal weakness. It requires widespread intelligence.
And that is the flaw. As they put it, ignorance is fertile. If the voters are not educated and informed, democracy becomes susceptible to demagogues, to misinformation, to the manipulation of public opinion by the wealthy.
A danger that feels very, very current.
Extremely.
Now for the darkest part of the whole book,
What?
war.
The numbers are just staggering. In the last 3,421 years of recorded history, only 268 have been free of war.
That is a deeply depressing statistic. It's basically the permanent condition of mankind.
It seems to be. And the causes of war between states are exactly the same as the causes of competition between individuals. Acquisitiveness, pugnacity, pride. We want stuff, we get angry, we have our egos. The state just does it on a grander scale and without any restraints.
They have this brilliant literary device, a dialogue between the general and the philosopher.
It's a great way to lay out the two opposing views. The general argues that a long peace makes a nation soft and decadent, that war is the ultimate test, that it stimulates science, discipline, and courage, that you have to be willing to fight to survive.
And the philosopher's response?
The philosopher argues for a defiance of history, that just because it's always been this way doesn't mean it must always be. We should try to apply the golden rule to nations, not just individuals. But the Durants, as historians, are realists. They conclude that a world order, a lasting peace, will probably not come from a gentleman's agreement in a council chamber.
It will come from the victory of one power so overwhelming that it can enforce peace on everyone else.
Like Rome did. The Pax Romana. The Roman peace was possible because the Roman legions would crush anyone who disturbed it.
So we are essentially waiting for a new Rome. A Pax Americana? Or maybe a Pax Sinica? Or something else entirely?
That is the great open question of our time.
We are nearing the end now, Section 6, the final verdict. This is where they try to sum it all up. Growth and decay.
The cycle of civilizations. They begin, they flourish, they decline, and they die. They fail because their leadership can't meet a new challenge. An ecological disaster, a military invasion, an economic collapse.
They also talk about a fascinating idea, internal barbarization.
This connects all the way back to the themes of birth, race, and education. The idea is that if the majority, what they call the uncultured masses, multiplies faster than the minority, the educated cultured elite, then over time, the standards of the society are dragged down. Civilization decays from within.
But civilization itself doesn't die. This is an important point.
No, it migrates. This is their source of hope. Rome fell, but it passed its legacy of law, language, and culture to Europe. Europe, in turn, passed its heritage to the Americas. We are the heirs of 1,000 fallen civilizations.
So we stand on the shoulders of giants. Which brings us to the ultimate question. Is progress real?
It's a very tricky question. If human nature hasn't changed, are we just smarter savages with better gadgets? The Durants acknowledge that science is neutral. It can kill with an atom bomb or heal with an antibiotic.
But they do offer a definition of progress.
And it's a very practical one. Progress is the increasing control of the environment. And by that metric, yes, we have absolutely progressed. We live longer. We suffer less from famine and plague. We have more knowledge at our fingertips than any emperor of the past.
But the ultimate form of progress, for them, is our heritage.
Yes. This is the beautiful, almost poetic ending of the book. We as individuals are not born biologically better than a baby born in ancient Greece. But we are born into a much richer heritage. We inherit the accumulated knowledge, art, science, and wisdom of all the generations that came before us.
A celestial city.
That's their metaphor for it. The past isn't a graveyard of forgotten horrors. It's a living city of the mind, a place where the greatest minds still speak to us. Plato, Shakespeare, Newton, Einstein, they are alive and present in the heritage that we possess.
That is a surprisingly optimistic note to end on, considering all the war, inequality, and famine we've just discussed.
It is the historian's optimism. It's not a naive belief that things will always get better, but a deep appreciation for the resilience of civilization and the immense treasure that we've inherited.
It's the long view.
So, after this incredible journey through 100 centuries, what does this all mean for us right now in our chaotic times?
I think it means we need to cultivate a sense of historical patience. We are part of this long, immense chain. We need to respect both the roots of tradition, the conservatives, and the new grafts of innovation, the rebels.
And to see our own problems in perspective.
Exactly. To realize that our problems, inequality, political strife, moral decay, the threat of war, are not new. We have survived them before. Humanity has muddled through.
And we can hopefully muddle through again if we take the time to learn these lessons.
That's the hope. Well, I want to leave our listeners with that single provocative thought from the biological section that has been rattling around in my head this whole time. The Durant state, as a lesson of history, that freedom and equality are sworn and everlasting enemies. So the question for you to think about is this. In our modern world right now, which one are we currently choosing to sacrifice for the sake of the other? And is the price becoming too high?
A question for the ages indeed.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.